how much in our lives depends on heredity. Often the fight against bad genes turns into a long struggle throughout life. When it comes to health problems, for example, it is encouraging that in the future science may find a way to solve all these problems or even improve people by changing their genes. In this video, I'm going to tell you about genetics and present 10 interesting facts about this science. Thanks to an advanced educational system and the availability of information, we know that all living organisms have genes. However, this has not always been the case. Even in ancient times, people were interested in the question of how plants and animals managed to preserve their physical properties. Our ancestors conducted small experiments on crossing different crops, and they managed to grow a stronger crop. Of course, all this was done on a rough basis, and no one could explain the success or failure of such experiments. The philosophers of ancient Greece made great progress in genetic matters. It was they who laid the beginnings of the concept of heredity. That is, they came to the conclusion that a child inherits certain characteristics, both externally and internally, from his parents. Of course, their ideas were not entirely correct. Parmenides and Anaxagoras believed that a child's resemblance to its mother or father depended on the position of the embryo in the womb. If the embryo was on the left, the child would be a copy of its father, and if it was on the right, it would resemble its mother. Now, these thoughts seem funny or even delusional, but we should not forget that the thinkers of that time did not have microscopes and ultrasound machines. The science of genetics itself is relatively young. It appeared only in 1865 thanks to the experiments of the monk Gregor Mendel. During these experiments, he established a pattern of heredity traits in peas. The scientist proved that hereditary factors are discrete, that is, separate and independent from each other. It was not until 1909 that biologist Wilhelm Ludwig Johann Sandow introduced the name for these hereditary factors that we are now familiar with: genes. All of these discoveries belong to the first stage of the development of genetics. Biologists study plants, conduct experiments, and confirm their theories. A new stage in the development of this science began in the middle of the 20th century, when scientists James Watson and Francis Crick separated DNA and determined the structure of the genetic code, which stores the most important information about an organism. In the past, notions of what a gene is helped, for example, breeders develop special varieties of plants and new breeds of animals. Breeders selected the qualities they wanted and discarded the unnecessary. This is how, for example, every breed of dog we know about came into being. However, modern technology allows genes to be manipulated and altered more accurately. I will talk about all of this further on in the video. During Stalin's reign in the USSR, there was a scientist, academician Trofim Lysenko. He made a name for himself in the scientific community by inventing a special method of treating seeds that made them germinate faster. The method was to treat seeds with moisture and cold before planting. At the same time, Lysenko was very charismatic and quickly achieved a high position in the party. His method was indeed effective in some situations. However, the rest of his ideas, which he adhered to, were absolutely pseudo-scientific and delusional. He denied evolution through natural selection and genetics per se. That is, he claimed that living organisms do not get these or those characteristics from their parents thanks to their genes, but thanks to their environment. Stalin liked this position, and it was very ideologically convenient. Damned capitalist, and argued that a person's character traits are not dependent on him or herself or the society in which he or she lives, but are stupidly inherited from his or her parents. Whereas ideologically correct Soviet genetics argued that by building the right communist society, that is, environment, a person will get the right qualities and character traits. Eventually, Lysenko became head of the Lenin All-Union Academy of Agricultural Sciences, and a period began, which in Soviet history is called Lysenkovщина. The persecution of real genetic scientists began, who were declared accomplices of the capitalists and enemies of the party. Those who were afraid of repression signed something like a renunciation of all their ideas, that is, of the real scientific models. Instead, they publicly accepted Lysenko's pseudoscientific ideas, and those who refused to do so went to prison, and some were even shot. The Lysenko period lasted almost 30 years. During this time, Soviet genetics fell very far behind the world because of misconceptions about this science. Soviet farming was much less efficient than in Western countries. All this only exacerbated that deplorable food situation in the Soviet Union. After all, Lysenko's adherents tried to implement Soviet farming with completely ineffective methods of plant and animal breeding. American scientists in 1972 launched a new line of research in genetics, genetic engineering, as part of an experiment within the walls of Stanford University. A group of geneticists succeeded in creating recombinant DNA. In simple words, they were able to add a new gene to the DNA of E. coli. It would seem that such an experiment could make a difference on small bacteria that can't even be seen with the naked eye. But this was the beginning of a great future. As early as the 1970s, people had learned how to manipulate genes. A little later, in the 1990s, while studying unicellular organisms, graduate student Francisco Mojica discovered in their genome strange sequences of groups of organic compounds that were repeated many times and separated by gaps. Similar structures were found in many other bacteria. At the time, no one could figure out what they were for, so we gave them the name CRISPR, short palindromic repeats regularly arranged in groups. This discovery was returned to more than once, and scientists came to the idea that these compounds are nothing more than the bacteria's immune memory. The repeating sites store information about all the viruses the microorganisms have ever encountered. Researchers went further and realized that the Cas9 nucleus, which is also found in the genome, can cut the repetitive structure and remove or replace a gene. But the real breakthrough in this field was made by two clever women, Emmanuelle Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna. They took a bold step and used CRISPR and compounds to cut the DNA of any organism. By the way, they were even awarded the Nobel Prize in 2020 for this. There are now 3 main areas of CRISPR. Let me talk a little bit about each of them. CRISPR for research is the study of the role of specific genes in different life processes. And CRISPR for biotechnology has allowed humanity to improve plant and animal genetics. We've been able to create more disease-resistant crops that are rich in yields. We can also eliminate unwanted genes from the genetic code of animals. In the long run, this direction will help us replace the not-so-nice components of human DNA. We will be able to go into a wondrous new world with healthy and physically resilient people. But we should not forget the ethical aspects. Probably all of us would like to eliminate certain traits of our character, such as laziness or frequent mood swings. But think about it. Would you like to live in an ideal society from a test tube? I think this question will stall new research, and we won't know the whole truth about the experiments. There is another very useful field, CRISPR, for genetics therapeutics. This field is looking for a way to make the human genome immune, for example, to HIV infection or other immune diseases. A prime example that is already working is the repair of broken genes in children with spinal muscular atrophy. Since we have moved on to real examples of the work of genetic engineering, I cannot help but mention the first genetically engineered twins from China. The story of the year made a lot of noise in 2018. Considering that information about this project is still very limited, it is as if scientists do not want to cover all aspects of this scandalous experience of a Chinese researcher. He conducted an unusual and highly illegal experiment. He invited an HIV-infected man and an uninfected woman who wanted a child to take their DNA for in vitro fertilization. The geneticist interfered with the embryo and extracted the genome damaged by the virus. As a result, twins Lulu and Nana were born in 2018 and can no longer contract HIV, if the doctor is to be believed. This is indeed the first published experience with DNA modification in human embryos, but the public has revolted. For one thing, it's too early to tell the results. Such tampering with genetic connections could affect the next generation. Also, many didn't like the fact that the scientist worked in closed laboratories and provided the results after the babies were born. So far, the twin girls are alive, healthy and developing according to all norms. However, the rest of the information is carefully hidden, and we can only wait and see how this risky experiment of the Chinese scientist, who, by the way, disappeared, and nothing more is known about him, including whether he is alive or not. Since we're talking about children, it's time to move on to a more publicized topic: genetically modified foods. Many people talk about the danger of such products and the fact that we eat nothing but synthetics. Let's try to debunk the most popular myths about products, which appeared due to genetic engineering. Many people have a clear opinion that genetically modified products can cause cancer. This misconception is easily debunked by referring to medical research. Genetically modified foods appeared on store shelves back in the 70s, and since then, scientists and geneticists have tested the effects of modification on human health many times. There is not a single proven case of illness or even death after eating genetically modified foods. In this matter, it is better to believe real figures and experience rather than the opinion of ordinary people. Many people believe that genetically modified food is capable of causing mutations in people. Let's say the tomato gene was added to the fish gene. What would happen to a person who regularly eats such a thing? After all, vegetable, animal, or plant genes cannot affect the human genome in any way. People eat the genes of other living organisms all the time, and they always have. The modern scientific community, thousands of biologists, are almost unanimous in their opinion that genetically modified foods are not harmful to health in any way. This is the scientific consensus. Geneticists have no goal to exterminate humanity. This science, on the contrary, is trying to find a way to cure dangerous diseases and prolong life expectancy. Speaking of mutations, I would like to touch on another interesting topic: rare genetic diseases. It so happens that the genetic code sometimes fails, and no one can be sure in which generation it will happen. Sometimes people encounter rather rare and unusual mutations. If you think back pain or stress at work is interfering with your life, think about what it's like to be born with a condition where you can't sleep. Throughout the history of science, there have been about 40 known cases of families with the pathology of fatal familial insomnia. People in their 30s and 50s had very large sleep problems, and no amount of sleeping pills or other medications helped them sleep. On average, they stayed awake for 7 to 36 months and eventually died from exhaustion. Another unusual disease associated with a genetic mutation occurs in children and is called progeria. This disease occurs quite rarely, about 1 in 7 million children. Children with progeria age very quickly. It is not just visible on the outside, but also on the inside. The body of a 10-year-old with this disease corresponds to that of a 70-year-old old man. Scientists have not been able to find the cause of this malfunction in the DNA, but they have been able to find ways to keep such patients alive. One person was able to live to the age of 45, which is already a major breakthrough. After all, usually the average life expectancy of people with this disease is about 13 years, after which the patients die of a heart attack. By the way, even the owners of red hair and freckles can boast of a small genetic mutation. People with this type of people only about 2% of the entire population of the planet. They have an insufficient amount of melanin in the skin as a result of a gene failure. It's completely harmless and even attractive to some people. However, all sun-kissed people should not forget to wear sunscreen, because due to the lack of melanin, they have an increased risk of skin cancer. I have already mentioned the gamut of foods and genetically modified children. Now it's time to move on to the animal world. I want to tell you about the most unusual experiments of the scientific world. First on my personal list are genetically modified pigs, better known as eco-pigs. Canadian scientists at the University of Guelph created a new species of such animals by altering the genes in the bodies of these piglets. The processing of plant food, which releases phosphorus, was accelerated. The problem was that when phosphorus was broken down and excreted with the animal's waste, this element contaminated the water and land where the cattle were kept. GMO pigs could improve the environmental situation on farms, and the phosphorus, which goes through an accelerated recycling process, would serve as fertilizer for crops. Another cool experiment, though not yet implemented, is the creation of genetically modified mice with the development of cryptocurrency. The need for electronic wallets to store bitcoins and other cryptocurrencies has emerged. One organization, BitMouse, is looking for investors to recode mouse DNA. The anonymous creator of this idea wants to embed the Bitcoin wallet's private key into the mouse's genetic code. Accordingly, the price of the mouse will rise along with the market value of the cryptocurrency. Genetics allows modern man to learn many interesting things about himself. More and more people are getting adventurous and taking tests for ancestry. Such tests have long been relevant in the West, but in our country they have appeared recently, and people are beginning to become familiar with this opportunity to learn more about their ancestors. An ancestry test allows you to find out which ethnicities and nationalities have left a mark on your genome. Sometimes these tests play funny jokes on people. For example, Americans Walter McFly and Scarlett Robinson got a nice surprise for Christmas. The men had been friends for more than 60 years, since their school days, and although they had different personalities, they had always been close, like real brothers. What a surprise it was when they found out they were connected by blood. Both men took a DNA test and registered on a family tracing website. They both got a call and were told about the match. The fact is that Alan was a foster child and Walter was raised by his mother and had never seen his father. Apparently, the boy's father had a good vacation in Hawaii, but alas, he forgot to tell everyone that he left two blood brothers, who were so separated by fate. Another interesting incident occurred with ardent nationalist Craig Cobb. The man has always espoused Russian views of white supremacy, and he has been accused of fomenting conflict against black people more than once. As part of an American program, the man was asked to take an ancestry test. What was his surprise when the 62-year-old man learned that he was 14% African? Of course, Craig started talking about fraud and experimentation and never came to terms with the fact that there was 14% African blood in his perfect white blood. Now you can learn about your origins. What about cosmic genetics? Space affects our bodies and leaves a certain trace in the genome. I want to remind you that the space environment is extremely harsh and cruel to the human body. This is why astronauts undergo many tests before being sent to the ISS. It's not just stress on the body and psyche, but extreme survival conditions. So what happens to our genes in space? American scientists recently conducted an experiment on twin brothers. Kelly Mark stayed on Earth and his brother Scott lived on the ISS for a year. In addition to visible changes, such as changes in body weight and extra centimeters in height, the astronaut's body visibly rejuvenated. While Scott was in space, the end sections of his chromosomes lengthened. A similar structure is found in younger people by analysis. Scott's body appears to have been rejuvenated by 10 years. On arrival on Earth, by contrast, these sections of chromosomes had shrunk from their original values. The researchers also noticed that the expression of his genes had changed. Those that were previously dormant turned on, while others, on the contrary, stopped. Overall, the genes of the two brothers now differ by 7%. Which is surprising for identical twins. The topic of infinite youth has long been of concern to mankind. It is unlikely that any of you will be lucky enough to meet Dracula or find the Philosopher's Stone, but waiting for successful results from genetic engineering is a realistic scenario. Geneticists have been delving into the subject of aging for 20 years. To date, some 50 experiments have been conducted on mice, rats, and monkeys, which have succeeded in increasing their lifespan by 20%. This is a colossal step forward for youth. So how does it work? Scientists are doing a complex work, increasing the stability of the genome, rejuvenating hypothalamic cells, increasing the body's resistance to the effects of stress. Another important factor is working with age-related pathologies. Researchers prevent age-related muscle depletion and improve brain function. According to predictions, geneticists will soon be able to replace depleted organs and help find treatments for deadly diseases that exist today. Agree, the possibility of living to 150 years without back pain, leg pain, or wrinkles all over the body looks very attractive. I wonder if people will remember ethical standards when they get the chance to extend their lifespan. Who knows? Perhaps even you and I will catch the result of years of research. In the comments, I would like to know what genetic engineering breakthroughs you think will have the greatest impact on the development of our civilization. I read your responses, and they are also very helpful in promoting the video. And to continue the topic, I suggest you watch my videos about scary science experiments. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and give me likes. It helps me grow. Bye.